Across America, stories keep surfacing of so-called Karens, people whose tempers and entitlement spiral out of control, but sometimes their confrontations take a darker turn, where arrogance meets consequence, and ordinary arguments end in shocking, irreversible misfortune no one ever saw coming. It was August 14th, 2019, at the Berlin Zoological Garden in Germany. The summer sun was bright but gentle, and the zoo was filled with the steady rhythm of laughter, chatter, and camera shutters. Families crowded near the big cat enclosures, eager to catch a glimpse of the lions basking lazily in the warmth. But by late afternoon, what began as an ordinary day would spiral into a tragedy that left both visitors and staff horrified. Helene Fischer, 52, had taken the morning train from Potsdam to Berlin for what she called a quiet midweek adventure. Among friends, she was known for her sharp wit and stubbornness, traits that often made her quick to argue with strangers or push against any kind of authority. Though not an outdoors enthusiast, she prided herself on independence and often dismissed safety restrictions as overreactions. The lion habitat, one of the zoo's most popular exhibits, featured layered safety systems, a sturdy waist-high metal barrier followed by a steep drop into a dry moat about 10 feet deep. On the far side stretched the lion's grass-covered terrain dotted with rocks, trees, and logs. Signs clearly warned visitors to stay behind the railing. Staff routinely reminded anyone leaning too close, but some guests still ignored the rules for better photos. That day, Helena grew irritated after a zookeeper politely asked her to step back. She scoffed, accusing them of being too dramatic. She waved dismissively, muttering that she'd been to zoos all her life. Ignoring several warnings, she leaned over the railing with her phone out, taunting the lions for lying still. Parents nearby pulled their children away, sensing danger. Moments later, Helena's sandal slipped against the smooth metal edge. Her balance tipped, and with a gasp, she fell forward, flipping over the rail and plunging into the moat. The sound of her scream silenced the crowd. Below the lions, two females and a male froze for a heartbeat before instinct took over. The male lion charged first, teeth clamping into her shoulder. Helena screamed and flailed, clawing at the dirt. One lioness joined, slashing with her paws. Chaos erupted above, shrieks, running feet, and cries for help. Staff rushed in, deploying air horns and water cannons. The lions hesitated briefly under the blasts, but the male's grip only tightened. Blood stained the dusty ground as Helena's movements weakened. Within minutes, keepers succeeded in driving the lions back into a holding pen. Emergency responders entered only when it was safe, but Helena was already gone. She was pronounced dead on sight. Her injuries catastrophic. Visitors, many trembling and in tears, were escorted quietly away from the scene. Zoo officials later confirmed that the victim had ignored repeated verbal warnings and clear signage. "We do everything we can," one spokesperson said, "but we cannot protect visitors from their own choices." In the weeks that followed, the Berlin Zoo reinforced the barriers, adding higher fencing, more signs, and surveillance cameras to prevent another such tragedy. It was February 18th, 2020, in Chicago, Illinois. The Jackson Red Line subway station throbbed with the evening rush, the screech of trains echoing through tunnels, the shuffle of boots on concrete, the heavy air of impatience that clings to winter commutes. Announcements blurred through static, and the crowd pressed shoulder to shoulder as another train delay was announced. Among the hundreds weaving through the chaos, one woman's temper would soon turn the platform into a scene of horror. Margaret Maggie Nolan, 57, had lived in Chicago all her life. A payroll supervisor at a downtown accounting firm, she was known for her sharp tone and ironclad stubbornness. Friends said she was smart, independent, and proud, but easily provoked. Decades of commuting on the L had hardened her patience. Delays and crowding always seemed like personal affronts. Her colleagues often joked that Maggie could start a fight with an empty seat. That Tuesday, she left work frustrated after an argument with her manager. Snowflakes flurries drifted down as she entered the Jackson station, muttering about the cold. Inside, the platform was packed, a mix of exhausted workers and students waiting for the southbound train. The digital sign flickered with red text: "Service delay, signal failure." Witnesses later recalled that Maggie rolled her eyes, sighing loudly and pacing near the platform's edge, her gloved hands gripping a tote bag. When the next train finally arrived, the crowd surged forward. A young man beside her stepped ahead to make room for others. Maggie barked something at him. Witnesses couldn't recall exactly what, but the exchange quickly escalated. She accused him of cutting in line. He told her to calm down. Voices rose, the argument drawing attention. She was shouting, waving her arms, one passenger later told police. You could tell she wasn't letting it go. As the train doors slid open, Maggie tried to push past him. The man shifted aside, but her foot slipped on the wet yellow safety strip. Her body tilted forward. One startled gasp, a blur of motion, and then she was gone. The crowd froze as she plunged into the trough between the rails, landing hard on her side. For a moment, she lay stunned, struggling to move. Then, as she reached out to steady herself, her gloved right hand brushed the third rail. A blinding flash filled the station, followed by a sharp crackling noise that silenced everything. Maggie's body convulsed violently, her muscles locked by the current. Sparks erupted around her as screams filled the air. Commuters recoiled in terror. A few tossed scarves and jackets, desperate to help without touching her. But it was useless. 600 volts coursed through her body in seconds. Station staff rushed to cut power. When the current finally stopped, Maggie slumped motionless between the tracks, thin smoke rising from her coat. Paramedics arrived minutes later, but it was already too late. The electric shock had caused immediate cardiac arrest and severe burns. She didn't even have time to scream twice, one shaken witness said quietly. Police cordoned off the area as investigators reviewed surveillance footage, showing the entire sequence: the argument, the shove, the slip, and the fatal contact. By the time the station reopened hours later, commuters had already moved on. Trains resumed, crowds returned, and the city's pulse beat on as if nothing had happened. In news reports the next morning, the story was framed as yet another subway fatality, one among many in a city used to tragedy. But those who had seen it couldn't forget the image. A moment of anger, a flash of light, and then silence. As one commuter put it, it wasn't the electricity that killed her first, it was her temper. It was August 6th, 2016, in Killeen, Texas. The evening heat shimmered above the asphalt of a crowded mall parking lot, where the air buzzed with idling engines and the clatter of shopping carts. Families moved between rows of cars, headlights flickered, and a faint smell of hot rubber hung heavy in the air. It was an ordinary Saturday until a confrontation spiraled into a fatal display of pride and anger. Diane Stokes, 47, was well known around town. She'd worked a series of temporary clerical jobs, but was remembered more for her fiery temper than her efficiency. Local store employees recognized her immediately. The woman who argued about return policies raised her voice at managers and turned small inconveniences into public scenes. She liked being in control, and any challenge to that control seemed to ignite something inside her. At 5'4" and weighing over 200 pounds, Diane often grew winded with effort, but refused to show weakness. Parking lots, with their constant bustle and competition for space, seemed to bring out her worst instincts. That evening, she parked her silver sedan near the middle of the mall's lot. When she returned, she found a stray shopping cart pressed against her rear bumper. A young man in a red vest, a cart collector barely in his 20s, was nearby pushing a long line of carts towards the entrance. Without hesitation, Diane began shouting, accusing him of damaging her car. The worker tried to continue his task, quietly insisting he hadn't touched it, but she stepped into his path, blocking the lane. Witnesses said her voice carried across the parking lot. "You think you can just hit my car and walk off?" she yelled, hands on her hips. The young man shook his head, trying to maneuver the heavy line of carts around her, but Diane refused to move. When the front carts bumped her legs, she grabbed the metal rail, jerking it backward with both hands. The sudden pull broke the line's alignment, and several carts swung sideways with force. One of the carts struck her square in the chest. The impact wasn't severe, but for Diane, it was enough. Her balance faltered, her weight shifted, her foot slipped on the sloped asphalt, and she toppled backward. Her head hit the pavement with a sharp, hollow crack that witnesses later said sounded like a bat hitting stone. The carts continued rolling, bumping over her legs before the worker managed to stop them. For a few seconds, she tried to move. Her hand twitched, her mouth opened, but no sound came out. A small, dark pool began spreading beneath her head, seeping quickly into the pavement. Shoppers screamed, a few rushed to help, but none dared move her after seeing the blood. The cart collector knelt beside her, shaking, trying to check for a pulse. There wasn't one. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but the scene was grim. Diane had suffered a severe skull fracture and massive internal bleeding. She was pronounced dead at the scene, her body later covered with a white sheet, as stunned bystanders whispered nearby. News spread fast through town, but sympathy was scarce. Many locals remembered her temper. Stories circulated of her shouting at cashiers, blocking lines, and picking fights over trivial things. She always had to be right, one store clerk told reporters. Even when it didn't matter. The mall reopened within the hour. Workers cleared the carts, washed the pavement, and business resumed as if nothing had happened. For most, Diane's death was not a tragedy, but a grim reminder that sometimes the battles people insist on fighting end up being the ones they lose most completely. A single moment of anger changed everything, a haunting reminder that pride and temper can destroy faster than anyone expects.